The podcast you are about to listen to is not a medical podcast, nor is it designed to diagnose a condition. While there are medical experts on this show, any questions regarding medical care or concern should be directed to a primary care physician.
Welcome to Game On Glio, the podcast providing hope, inspiration, education, and real conversations around the difficult journeys of grief and loss, and being diagnosed with brain cancer, such as glioblastoma. I'm your host, Shannon Traphagen. If you enjoy our show, please consider writing a review. Also, share us with a friend. You can follow us on Facebook at Game On Glio or on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast. Or you can visit our website, thegameongliopodcast.com, for our blog, insights, and guest snapshots. Season 2 of the Game On Glio podcast is sponsored by GT Medical Technologies and Gamma Tile Therapy. Learn more at gtmedtech.com. This episode is brought to you by Mimivax LLC, developing immunotherapeutic vaccines and therapies for treatment of cancers such as glioblastoma. Learn more at mimivax.com. Poet Miguel Alvarez once said, "You'll know when you get there. For now, just keep typing." I was reflecting on this quote the other day as I sit with the significance of what this month is and how much it weighs on me. As I let the quote sink into my bones, I reframed it to mirror my life's path right now. You'll know when you get there. For now, just keep walking forward. When you lose someone so vital and significant in your life, you lose your compass and you start to flounder. But the truth is, you have to trust your gut, your instincts, your soul. Your inner soul is your compass, and it will help you find your way. So you just have to keep going forward, even when you don't know where you're going or where there is. Keep going, and you'll know when you get there. Over the span of the last 2 years without Mike, I have come up against some hard truths. The fact of the matter is, life without Mike sucks. It's lonely. But what I'm learning is that this experience we call life is a journey. It's never, ever a destination. It doesn't just end at a place or a point. You never stop moving forward, even when you don't want to move forward. I've found that if I embrace my grief, and by embrace I mean I let it teach me, I let it move me, I let it guide me, then I don't see it as a threat. I can find peace along this new path, even though life with Mike in it would be so much better. I can find happiness, and hopefully I can learn to love life again. Because let's face it, just because chapters of our lives have already been written and can't be erased, they've been published. It doesn't mean we can't rewrite where the story goes from here. Endings don't have to be endings. They can be new beginnings. Isn't that what life is all about? Rewriting more than writing from scratch? So if you don't like what's on the page in front of you, change it. You might not be able to erase what's already been published, what's already been done, what's already happened. But you can always rewrite what's to come. This is what I'm learning right now. And these lessons are by no means easy. But I just keep walking forward, and I'll know when I get there. Our guest today, Dave Stevenson, founder of the Fierce Foundation and a widower, has learned his own lessons along his journey with loss. We speak to him next, after a brief message from our sponsor.
Imagine waking up from brain tumor removal surgery knowing that your radiation treatment is already underway. That's how gamma tau therapy works. At the end of brain tumor removal surgery, your neurosurgeon implants tiny gamma tiles where the tumor is most likely to return. So instead of waiting to start daily standard radiation treatments that go on for weeks, you get a head start against tumor cells and get back to your life sooner. Gamma tau therapy is for operable brain tumors of all types, including glioblastomas, brain metastases, and meningiomas. It is a one-time targeted radiation treatment with fewer side effects and far less chance of hair loss than external radiation. Gamma tau therapy is FDA-cleared radiation therapy for patients with newly diagnosed malignant brain tumors and recurrent brain tumors. Gamma tau therapy is tough on tumors and easier on patients and caregivers. Learn more at gammatile.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode 8 of the Game On Glio podcast. In this episode, we are actually talking about grief and loss. We are talking about it as it relates to brain cancer, but it also happens to be falling on the 2-year anniversary of my late husband, Michael's death. And with us today, our guest, Dave Stevenson, is the father of 4 boys and a marketing executive for the Bank of America. Widowed in 2018 when his wife, Karen, of 16 years, died from her battle with glioblastoma. He and his boys later founded the Fierce Foundation, which is a charitable organization to help patients, families, and caregivers that are facing rare cancer diagnoses. Dave, thank you so much for being with us today.
Shannon, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So, we are diving into some very heavy topics today, but I want to start with your life before brain cancer, your life before grief and loss, before death. What did your life with Karen look like before she was diagnosed?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to remember what life was like before, but I tell you that we had a really happy and fulfilling life with the 4 boys who were pretty young at the time. So we were very involved and have been very involved in our local community. So Karen had been a teacher. Mm-hmm. And she taught 5th grade at an elementary school. It's actually how I met her. She was a teacher with my mother, who was also a 5th grade teacher, and that's how we were introduced to one another.
Oh, that's interesting.
Karen had stopped working shortly after we had our second, and she was a stay-at-home mom. But she continued to be very involved within the community. She served as president of the PTO for the local elementary school. She had kicked off and overseen a number of initiatives and events for the school from a fundraising perspective. And she was also really active with the kids from a sports perspective. So she coached them in basketball. She coached them in t-ball. I was the president of our local Little League. We invested an awful lot of time in the kids and spending time with family, in being together really is what was most important to us. We certainly traveled when we had the opportunity, but Karen was really about the kids and making sure that they had everything that they needed and that she was very active and involved in their lives. So that's certainly a period of time that I'm very thankful for, that the kids were able to have that opportunity.
How old were you guys when you guys met?
I was about 30, and I think she was probably 25 or 26.
Okay, so you guys were fairly young.
Yeah, we were pretty young, and we met and got married about a year later.
Wow.
And then had our first about 3 years or so after we had met.
Okay, so married for 16 years. So you guys were together over 17 years in total.
We were.
That's quite an amazing life and journey to have. So Karen was diagnosed with glioblastoma. What year was she diagnosed, and how old was she, and how old were the boys?
Yeah, so she was diagnosed in October of 2016. In fact, we're coming up on the day when she had her first kind of symptom that led us to the diagnosis. And so it was October of 2016. So she was, I think, 41 when she was diagnosed, and the boys were 13, 11, 8, and 6. So they were still pretty little at the time of her diagnosis.
Wow. So in 2016, she was diagnosed. What were the symptoms? What kind of rang the bell that something is really off and we needed to go in and get it looked at?
Sure. So she had probably for about 2 weeks at the end of September in 2016 was just having some issues visually. So she would, kind of see some echoes in the corner of her eye that, kind of seemed like she called it like a ceiling fan, like she could just see some things in the corner of her eye, and it, was very distracting and upsetting to her. She had gone to the doctor. They kind of thought that it was probably some medicine that she was taking. And so, she kind of went about her way. But then on October 5th, it had gotten a little bit worse and she wasn't feeling right. And so she was at home with my youngest, who, as I said, was 6 at the time. And she had called her sister to take her to the doctor so that she wasn't driving, which was good.
Right.
And she ended up having a seizure in the doctor's office. And so that's kind of what started the process. And so they took her to the hospital. They did a CAT scan and then ended up flying her. We live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So they ended up flying her down to the city. And so really very quickly, we had a pretty good sense of what was going on.
So at that point, and I hate to kind of bring you back to that moment, but what was your reaction? What was the conversation between you and her when you guys got the news?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was really a whirlwind, right, when it first happens, because as you go from, really living a completely normal and fulfilled life to being kind of tossed into something that is completely unexpected, bigger than you ever could have possibly imagined. And so I think kind of the first reaction was a defense mechanism. And, we were really both focused on the task at hand. We were focused on stability and normalcy for the kids. I think, initially when you get that diagnosis, and so, by the time she quickly kind of had a surgery, and although we had a sense of what it was, obviously had to have the surgery, we went through the biopsy and then met with the neurosurgeon at the end of October to get the final diagnosis. And so, I think we had been preparing for that news, because I think there was an assumption that it was certainly a malignant tumor. But I think shock and disbelief is probably the initial emotion that we experienced. But I think I very quickly tried to move to resolve and hope for her. And I thought it was really important that she feel that I was on task to do everything that we could to try and, address the situation and take it kind of one step at a time. So it's hard to imagine all of that and to go back to it. But I think at the time it was really important for me to get kind of on task so that I could support her and provide the type of support that she needed.
And that's a heavy load, right? I mean, it's becoming the caretaker and trying to have enough hope for the both of you, and then maintaining, obviously, with you guys having 4 children, to also try to maintain that support and be that extra strength for. That's a heavy load, and it definitely changes everything as you walk forward through that journey. Being the caretaker of somebody that's going through this, as much as it is a hard path for them, it is also an extremely hard path for the main caretaker, the primary partner that's walking alongside of them.
Certainly. And I agree with that. I think I've tried to put myself in her shoes and realize that my journey, while complicated, wasn't nearly as difficult as hers, obviously. And so, but I agree with you, right? It was, again, what was most important to us was to be able to try and maintain some sense of normalcy. We had and continue to have a tremendous kind of support group. She was one of 7 sisters and brothers. And so we had a really large support system that was able to help us. She had some really great friends who had experience with, dealing with kids
Mm-hmm.
in this situation. So the support group was incredibly helpful. But it was really important to me to try and stay really focused on the tasks and keep the kids involved in school and their activities, and try to keep life moving forward as normal as we could for them,
Right.
so that they weren't dealing with additional disruptions, beyond the uncertainty that I'm sure they felt.
Right. So now she was 40 when she was diagnosed. How old was she when she passed away?
So she was 41 when she was diagnosed, and she was just short of her 44th birthday when she passed away.
Okay.
So she passed away in February of 2018, and it had been about 16 months from the time of diagnosis, which, was what the doctors had told us was the average life expectancy, which is frustrating because I think it's
Yeah.
been that long for about 40 years. So
Yeah. Yeah. And did they say, was there a trigger or something that really precipitated or kind of sped up her decline at the end? Or was it just that this was taking its course and what they were doing was not working? Because obviously there's so many different reasons for why people either go beyond the 15-month mark, or really don't make it to that point. And so we get a lot of questions from listeners about this.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess I don't know the answer. She had a very successful, surgery where they were able to remove all the visible tumor. But as you know, and as I'm sure your
Mhm.
listeners know, one of the complexities with glioblastoma is the fact that there are so many cells that they can't get because of the location, and so
Mhm.
recurrence is almost always a reality, right? And so, we were very successful with the initial, kind of course of treatment and, standard of care. She had no recurrence or no regrowth for probably the first 7 or 8 months.
Mhm.
And, when she finally did, it was kind of slow at first, and we tried a variety of different chemotherapy agents. And so at the end, I was really focused on trying to do whatever we could do. I had taken her down to Bethesda, Maryland, to the National Institute of Health to try and,
Mhm.
get her involved in some kind of clinical trial. And so while I wouldn't change a thing, I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I think there's also a reality that in order for her to enter into some of those clinical trials, we had to stop some of the treatment that she was on. And so I
Right.
think at some point we just got behind the tumor growth.
Mhm.
And once you're behind the tumor growth, it's kind of hard to catch up again.
Right. And that's the whole journey, with dealing with brain cancer, whether it's glioblastoma or another form. It's a matter of being willing and open to trying anything.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So now, after Karen passed away, how did you guys handle it? I mean, what did those first few months, that first year look like for you and the boys?
I think that it was a blur, if I'm being honest, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was because I was trying to stay so kind of task focused. So as I had said before, Karen was really the one who managed our house and
Mhm.
understood everything about the kids in school and all of their, doctors and everything that had to do with the boys. And so I had to, really quickly kind of get myself up to speed and immerse myself in all of those activities. And so I was very focused on those tasks. And so, probably the adrenaline, the need to kind of keep things moving forward and keep us together
Mhm.
was really what enabled us to be able to get through. I remember, and I've talked about it with the boys since then, really for the first 6 months, we talked about moving as a unit. So we did everything together. So if somebody had a sporting event, everybody went. I actually took them on a bunch of different trips in those first 6 months just for us to be together,
Wow.
because it was really important to me that they understood that, we were going to make it through this unexpected and terrible event, but
Mhm.
their mother would have wanted them to find ways to be happy and find ways to move forward. And so it was really important to me to try and stay focused on that. And then, honestly, as I said before, we're very lucky to have a really great support system. So, the community really came together. As I said, both Karen and I were really actively involved in the community. So, we had dinners for, most of the nights from Karen's diagnosis until 6 months after she passed.
Wow.
She was one of seven. So her, brothers and sisters were incredibly helpful. The boys have 15 cousins. And so they had the opportunity to be around their family and their cousins all the time. Karen has four sisters. And so, her sisters were in the house and around. One of her sisters stayed with us really for the first 3 weeks after Karen died. So,
Wow.
that support was
Mhm.
really what enabled me to be able to have the strength to be able to do what needed to be done to keep everything moving forward. So I think we're very blessed with the support system, and then really focused on, kind of staying together as a group, and recognizing that we were all going through it together. I know we're going to talk about, grief specifically, but we were also really open about the way we were feeling, about when we were missing her,
Hmm.
about talking about her. Also, we were always were and have and continue to be, very open about things like cancer. So, I
Mhm.
remember, the boys and I talked about it. You don't realize how many cancer commercials there are on the television until you've gone through it.
Yes.
And so, we didn't shy away from any of that, right?
Mhm.
We had been touched and had experienced it. And so there weren't any topics that were taboo. And I think that was very helpful in enabling us to, kind of move forward as best we could.
And it sounds like you really did receive a lot of support, not only from your own immediate family, but from your in law family. It sounds like everybody kind of rallied around each other. I mean, do you still keep in touch with Karen's siblings? Do you guys still talk to each other, share memories of her? I mean, what does that look like?
Absolutely, we do. Yeah, and
Wow.
so they're still a really big part of our life, and I feel very blessed to, really have them as a support system. In fact, we still every summer we go with them on their family vacation and all stay together. One of Karen's sisters lives 2 minutes away, and her oldest is the same age as my youngest, and so they're very good friends. And so, yes, we have stayed very close with all of her brothers and sisters and her parents, and that has
Wow.
been really, 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 really important. I mean, one of the only things when we talked about, a potential future that Karen wouldn't be in, when Karen and I
Mhm.
talked about it, the one thing that she asked is that I made sure that the kids continued to be around their cousins, their aunts, and their grandparents. And so they've all made it really, really easy for me. And so I am incredibly thankful to Karen's parents, to Karen's brothers and sisters. Everybody has really continued to be an active part of their lives, and that has been really, really important to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the difference that can make, and we've talked on this show a few times. For a lot of individuals, when going through grief and loss, they suffer secondary losses, and nobody really talks about those secondary losses and what the impact that
Yeah.
has on the primary caregiver, on the person who lost their partner or their spouse. And so losing some of those extra supports really just it's re-grief. It's kind of re-traumatizing the situation. So knowing that they really rallied around you and you really rallied around them and you guys had each other after the fact and all these years later, which is not that long, but that you guys are still a big part of each other's lives and still talk to each other, that really does provide a lot of weight and significance and really can help carry individuals through a very difficult time. So it's great to hear that. And you are very blessed to have that because not everybody does.
Yeah, it really. It really makes a tremendous difference. And I mean, your point about the secondary losses is very real. I would say the way that manifested itself with me was in some of the friendships that we had. So,
Mm-hmm.
As a married couple with kids that had been together for a long time, so many of our social circle were other married couples with kids. And,
Yeah.
it's not that those people weren't there for me, because they were. But
Mm-hmm.
I think I found myself feeling uncomfortable in those situations, or it heightening the sense of loss that I already felt. And so I think that is one part of my life that has changed,
Mm-hmm.
and that it became very difficult, for me to maintain some of those relationships, because the identity of those relationships were built around being a couple, having kids and sharing, kind of similar circumstances. So I think that, the concept of the secondary loss is very real.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that it really exacerbates some of what a grieving person is going through after an event like this.
Right. And that's interesting. It's really interesting and fascinating to get the perspective from, to be quite honest, a male widower, because we don't talk about the male perspective often. A lot of people, when they talk about being a widow, and there's a lack of support groups in general for,
Mhm.
people who have lost a partner or a spouse. But for men, it's a different arena. It is a different feeling. It is a different mindset, especially when you are the one who now has to be the primary caregiver with the kids. So to see that perspective, that it was you who kind of felt different around those social groups, where with me, especially just with the friends, and I suffered some other secondary losses on top of that, but with the friend groups, there were certain friends that I had been part of those circles. They were married. We'd known them since, Mike and I were dating, but they grew up with him. And so after Mike had died, they backed off because it was too hard for them. They felt like, we can't keep staying around you because it's just a constant reminder, where I didn't want anything else to change. So from my perspective, I was like, I don't want to lose anybody else. I was holding on very tightly because there was a vulnerability there, and I didn't want anything else to change because so much had already changed. So it's interesting to see your perspective and how, you walked through that process versus, the perspective I was having walking through that process. And for me too, we were just starting to have a family. So we didn't have some of those connections to other families with children. All of our friends had children, and we were just starting that process. And so there was a loss of that as well,
Yes.
because that never came to fruition.
Yes. Yes. I completely get that. I think, one of the complicated things about grief and when something like this happens is you also lose kind of your future plans, even though,
Yeah.
they weren't real. But, in your mind, they're real, and you had imagined kind of a future that just won't come. Right. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely where you can get kind of caught up in, some of the emotion of it. If I focus too much on what isn't going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
that I had planned on happening. So that's definitely a complicated part of it. But I do think that, your point about, and I've had the opportunity to participate in a number of different groups with, widows and widowers. You are
Mm-hmm.
right. Most of the time it's widows and not widowers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of reasons for that. I think more men, pass away early than women, but also less men are probably likely to, try and seek out that type of support. And so I remember, a couple of times we had gone and participated in some grief events or, grief counseling, and they were group events. And,
Mm-hmm.
the boys were almost all the time, everybody else that was there was a woman. But there were a handful of times when a man walked in and the boys would look at me and kind of give me a thumbs up, like, hey, there's another guy. So, it is interesting as a man, to kind of go through this, because you're right. I had to, really, teach myself how to do some different things. And one of the other things that I found is that, as I was interacting with, couple friends that we had, or even new people, I tended to have a lot more in common with the women than I had with the men.
Interesting.
So that, that was kind of an interesting adaptation as well.
So I want to explore this a little bit from a guy's perspective. You talk a little bit about things that you had to teach yourself, things that you had to start doing that in the dynamic of the relationship you didn't have to do before. And I've met some other guys that are widowers that have struggled with some of these aspects too. So what are some things that you had to teach yourself? What are some things that you had to fundamentally change about how you approached daily living and taking care of the household and the boys that, used to be Karen's responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of it, right? So, I didn't really cook. I grilled, and so I had to teach myself. As I said before, for about 6 months after she passed, we had a meal train kind of going every day, and at some point, I kind of sent out a note to everybody and said, "Listen, it's time for me to be a big boy, and I've got to figure out how I'm going to survive in this new reality." And so, I really had to, kind of first teach myself how to cook, and not just cook, but also cook stuff that the kids liked. So that, and I think, really being close to kind of their teachers and what was happening at school, really understanding kind of their doctor's appointments and being very aware of all that stuff. And so, I did it the only way that I know how, which I tried to become very organized. And so, we created kind of very, intricate schedules. I did meal planning. I, created journals where I kept track of their medical histories and kind of what was happening. And so,
that's impressive.
I really had to kind of create routine for myself in order to be able to, adjust and figure it out. Also, I think it's important to note, when we talk about support systems, I was, really blessed to have a very supportive work environment. And so I was given a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of working from home before working from home was a thing, having the flexibility to be able to kind of just drop off, when I had to do things for the kids. And so I know that everybody is not as fortunate. And so I was very fortunate to be able to not have to worry about losing my job,
Right.
but being given the flexibility to be able to deal with life as I figured out how to, kind of manage through that. And so I think that was an important part too.
Yeah, that's extremely important to touch on, because for employers, and if there are employers out there that are listening, I hope they take note of this. Grief does not stop after 6 months to a year. It takes a while for the person who is left behind, essentially, and their family to get their footing and to really navigate what this new life looks like. So there are a lot of people that there's an expectation that, 6 months in, a year and a half, oh, you're good. You should be good now. But it really takes a long time to figure out the nuances and to get your footing again, and to figure out what those foundations are going to be without that person there.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, from having that kind of support from your boss and your company, and having it be ongoing is vital, because it doesn't stop. And grief, it never really goes away. It just takes on some different forms. It may feel or look differently. It evolves, but it never goes away. So there's always hiccups and little stumbles that you have along the journey, because it's a journey.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point, that I think that there is probably an opportunity, for employers to probably have, maybe more thoughtful considerations in the way that they handle bereavement. Because as most places, will give you a week, to take off for managing that, which is just a ridiculous approach and amount of time to be able to deal with something, particularly given how profound it is in kind of changing your life. And I think what you get if you have a supportive employer, if we're strictly talking from a benefit standpoint, I think what you get is a very loyal employee, right?
Right.
If you do it right and you manage it the right way, I think you get the opportunity to have somebody who really believes in the support system and is really going to come back and be in a position where they're really anxious to be able to contribute to the organization that was there for them when they needed it to be. And so that's definitely, kind of a big part of it.
Right. So let's dive into starting the Fierce Foundation, because you started this in honor of Karen. How long after she died did you start the foundation, and what was the purpose? I mean, when you originally started having these conversations about, hey, let's put a foundation together, because that's no easy feat. What drove that conversation, and what were you hoping to get out of it when you first started it?
Sure. Well, I think the reality is that from the moment that she passed away, it was really important to the boys and I for us to be able to do something that would make sure that her memory lived on and that she was remembered, right?
Mm-hmm.
So admittedly, our original impetus was to be able to have some way for her death to not be in vain, and for us to be able to do some of the things that were important to her. One of the things that she talked about while she was going through her treatment was that she really wanted to be able to get better so that she was able to help people that were going through something similar. And so, we knew that we wanted to do something to remember her, something in her memory, and something that was in line with what she wanted to be able to do,
Mm-hmm.
which was to be able to take care of people who were going through something similar. And so, from right away, we knew that we wanted to do something. I think we were smart enough to allow ourselves as a family to go through kind of that grieving and rebirth process to be able to figure out how we were going to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But after we did that, about a year later, we really started to kind of think through what we wanted to do and to be able to put kind of the wheels in motion to be able to do it. And so we ended up launching the Fierce Foundation just about 2 years. So we did it really on her birthday, just about 2 years after she had passed away. Now that happened to time almost perfectly with the start of the pandemic. And so the timing of the launch
Oh, geez.
wasn't the best, but we've been very fortunate to be able to have a lot of support and be able to get off the ground despite the fact that we launched at the onset of the pandemic.
So you guys launched in 2020. Where are you guys now? What's your mission and goals for the Fierce Foundation?
And so, as I said, I think we got a slow start because of the pandemic. And so, we were able to, and fortunate again to have a lot of her family members and friends that have been really important contributors to helping us kind of get this off the ground and, kind of get the word out and create some events and do some fundraising. And so, we have been very focused on fundraising activities since the launch, and we're actually, starting our grant process on January 1st. And so, we will be in a position to disperse grants starting on January 1st. And so, our mission is really, it's kind of twofold. So certainly from a local advocacy standpoint and from a grassroots standpoint, one of our primary objectives is to make sure that we are helping and supporting patients and families and caregivers that are dealing with rare cancer diagnoses. I think when we were thinking about what we wanted to do, I think we recognized that there are lots of organizations out there to support cancer. And a lot of those organizations are focused on, some of the more common cancers, which makes sense, right? But I think we're very focused on trying to figure out a way to raise awareness and create advocacy and provide support for people that are very specifically dealing with rare cancer diagnoses, obviously with a focus on glioblastoma, which is obviously what Karen was diagnosed with. So, first and foremost, our objective is to be able to provide that support. And so, that can be support like meals, it could be transportation, it could be therapeutic services like massage or Reiki, things that were, kind of very important to Karen. It could be, support for kids. It could be providing support after a loss around therapy or grief therapy. So there are a number of different things that we want to be able to support, but that primary focus is on providing some of the necessary infrastructure to help those that are dealing with diagnosis, dealing with treatment, and dealing with loss in order to make sure that they are able to gain some of the support that they need. Now, there's a second part of that, as I said, which is the advocacy part of it. And so I think we want to be able to partner with other organizations like yours that are very focused on raising awareness and creating advocacy for the fight against, this terrible brain cancer. And so we want to be able to be in a position to be able to have that voice and be supportive of it. And so there's a couple of, things that I want to be able to do long-term as well with the foundation, including creating more of that awareness, helping improve things like insurance payments for grief counseling and therapy, because I know from participating in a number of these, right, that there are a lot of people that aren't pursuing grief counseling because it is cost prohibitive. So there are things that we want to do. And then I think also from an advocacy standpoint, ironically, I work in the data field. So my paying job is around, understanding and leveraging data to better understand consumers. And so I think one of the things that struck me through my journey, and I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I think I was frustrated by how little questions there were as we went through the journey in terms of, behavioral characteristics or, other things that, kind of Karen had experienced or went through her life, or, patterns that she did to try and understand, where there could be some causality with her eventual diagnosis. And so I think I've been struck by how little data was collected in terms of understanding some of those things. And so, I remember, one of the things that stuck in my head is I had read an article about a pair of brothers who, had a sibling who was going through a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And so, they felt that there was a similar lack of clarity around data capture around that. And so they partnered with Microsoft. They built a database to collect information. And now that information is used, by doctors kind of across the United States. And so I think there is an opportunity both to advocate for people dealing with this diagnosis in terms of support, in terms of treatment options, in terms of therapy. And then I also think there's an opportunity for us to improve the information that the doctors and the scientists have access to help them better understand this disease. And so, beyond kind of that grassroots local effort, that we are actively pursuing in our ability to provide help to patients, families, and caregivers, I think I also endeavor, to make kind of profound change more broadly as time goes on. That's going to take some time, but we're going to work to kind of build the partnerships and do what we can do to kind of continue to raise awareness. Things like this, Shannon, and the work that you're doing is so important to that, right? It's an opportunity to bring together people who are going through this and help us to kind of have a voice. And so, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. It's, the whole purpose of starting the podcast was because there was a gap. There was a gap in, there's foundations that are supporting various communities, but there was a gap with information sharing and having it be in real time. And so knowing that somebody can be sitting in their car and listening to really important and vital information, and to have that information sharing in an audio and in a verbal platform like this, and a media platform like this, is crucial, because again, it's a form of data capturing, but in real time as individuals are expressing and talking about their journeys. And it's why anytime I talk to a caregiver or a patient, I ask, how did this start for you? What were the symptoms for you? What did life look like? What was going on ahead of time? Because I think that this is so important for those who don't understand glioblastoma and the dynamics of it. And there is a frustration, I think, in the community at large, across the nation, across the globe, of not being able to pinpoint, is there an environmental piece? Is there an inherent genetic component?
Exactly.
And I think that the doctors are they're starting to understand, could there be a link or a connection between, Alzheimer's, dementia, and a pattern with developing glioblastoma? If somebody's inherently exposed to possibly getting something like that down the road, if there's a genetic component there, could that link back to? And they're starting to kind of weigh different options. There's been tons of talk around cell use and not holding the phone right up to your ear. And, if depending on what type of environmental factor you're in, like Mike was an engineer. So I always go back to, was he exposed to something along the way that, contributed to, these glial cells going haywire, which is basically what happens. And so I think that, yeah, there is a frustration. And I think the more that we can start to understand that dynamic and find a way to break that blood-brain barrier. And so data collection is crucial. I mean, it's vital to be able to really get behind, making some massive strides and momentum in trying to slow this down. Even though this is a rare cancer, it's kind of a catch-22, right? It's that double-edged sword. You're glad it's a rare cancer, but then it also makes it extremely hard to treat because it's a rare cancer.
Exactly.
You don't want it to become breast cancer. You don't want it to have hundreds of thousands of people being diagnosed. You want it to stay on the lower side. But at the same time, because of that, the backing behind it and the lack of understanding and information sharing has made it very difficult. So it's kind of this double-edged sword.
Yeah, and I don't accept that it just happens, right? That we don't know why it happens, just something goes wrong. And so I don't think that we should accept that it just happens.
Right.
I think that we kind of owe it to everybody, kind of past, present, and future, to really understand if there is anything that we're missing.
Right.
Because that could certainly make the difference between improving outcomes, extending life, and, making a breakthrough in terms of understanding, this cancer.
Right. And I completely agree with you. Doing the work that you guys are doing, here we are now, we're at the tail end of 2022. Where are you guys now with the Fierce Foundation? With, you said you had a boy, your oldest son is in college. Where are you within the grief process? Where are you and the boys? You talk about how at the time that you guys were really starting to walk through this after she passed, it was hard to see the road ahead. It was hard to kind of figure out what a future could look like because you had a future in mind for so many years. Are you able to see the road ahead now? Where are you in the process? And has building the foundation really helped that?
I think that's a great question, right? And you've alluded to it a couple of times. I think that one of the things that I think has come from all of this is that I try to be very focused on the present and the moment that I'm in. Now part of that I think is the fact that I think that I don't want to say wasted time, but spent an awful lot of time lamenting over, a future that was only imagined and not realized. And so while I think it is important, obviously, in order to kind of live, you have to do some planning. While it is important for us to think about kind of the journey ahead, and we do that, I really try my best. I'm not always successful, but I really try my best to kind of live in the present moment that we're in and take all the joy out of the present moment that we're in that I can. So, where are we in the journey? I think the reality is, and this, that, grief doesn't just end. It's always there. And there are unknown and unforeseen triggers that sometimes happen that kind of pull us all the way back, to the beginning. Thankfully, the one thing that has happened in our experience is that those, kind of pullbacks are, fewer and far between than they were, certainly in the beginning. But the reality is that, we'll always deal with her loss in one way or another. And I don't want that to go away. I think that's an important part of our reality and our world. And I think if it were to completely go away, I feel like we would be doing a disservice to all the work that Karen did to raise these boys, to, be able to help me be the father that I am. And so I don't want to, kind of forget any of that. I think it's incredibly important. So I'm not trying to outrun our grief. I embrace it. I know that it's there. I know that we need to recognize it. I know that we need to talk about it. And so my focus is on providing, kind of a safe environment for the kids, being the parent that they need me to be as best I can. I don't always do it right. And to help them be focused on finding whatever makes them happy, but most importantly, making sure that they realize that they have each other, that they have me, and that we need to make sure that we appreciate and enjoy, the people that are in our lives that love us. And so I think the quick answer is we deal with the grief every day, right?
Right.
The pain isn't necessarily as raw as it was in the beginning, but we deal with the grief every day. We are aware, of, kind of who we are and where we are and what our story is.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also focused on making sure that, we're moving forward. We are honoring her memory, and we're doing what I know she would have wanted us to do, which is to figure out ways to find the joy.
And that's extremely important. I think you've touched on a couple of things that are just so vital in sharing grief stories and the journeys that we walk through. And I think that these most interesting, you said, we're not trying to outrun our grief. And that really sticks with me. I'm curious, as you guys are evolving through this journey of grief, I've started to see grief as a teacher, as hard as it is at times. And I'm wondering, and that to me is kind of a journey and a surprise in and of itself. I'm wondering what surprised you about the grief journey? What was something that you didn't expect to go through or feel after she passed?
That's a great question. That's probably a difficult one to answer, but I think the persistence of the grief, right? The way that it had the ability to kind of bring me back to the moment that it all started. But to your point, I think the fact that I try my best to lean into it when that happens,
Mm-hmm.
so that I am able to appreciate what we do have and to appreciate the blessings that we have, and to really try to be present and to, kind of push away some of the noise and really be able to focus on what's important. So like you, I think that there are some things, that the grief and the process has given me. And some of that is really being able to be more appreciative of, kind of the mundane, and be more appreciative of the everyday moments. And so I think that surprised me, in that I think when I started the journey, I expected grief to be a bad word.
Mm-hmm.
And I expected it to be something that was just devastating, that I wanted to get away from.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's been important that, we talk about it, that we recognize it, and that we figure out the best way to kind of lean into it. And again, not try to get away from it, but acknowledge that kind of it's a part of our story.
I love that. And to build upon that, today, in this moment, here we are at the end of October. What's one exciting thing that you have going on in your life currently?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, right? I think I'm excited about the kids and where they are with school, and, kind of continuing their life once they, kind of leave some of the protection of home and me. And so I think that's something that's certainly exciting. And then I've also, been fortunate enough to meet somebody, and so dating has been something that is difficult and
Yeah.
complicated, but I think I've been fortunate recently to have met someone that is patient, that is accepting of our past, that understands the role that Karen plays and the role that Karen will continue to play in going forward, and acknowledging that, Karen is their mom, and in really celebrating, kind of what she meant to them, and then just really understands how important my continued relationships with her family are for both me and the kids, and, has been very accepting of that. And so, dating can be complicated. Finding the right person who's able to deal with all of those things is important. And I think I've been, lucky to be able to find somebody who is patient and understanding, accepting, and wants to be a part of our past, and wants to understand her family, and really wants to kind of be a part of that. But it's a very, difficult and complicated process. But I think that there is hope, and there is an opportunity. And I do know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Karen would want me to be happy. And I think one of the things that's been really, kind of refreshing to me is that, when I talk to Karen's parents, and when I talk to Karen's siblings, who are so important to me, and whose continued involvement in our lives are so important to me. And, when I talk to them about meeting someone, and obviously feeling anxiety and being conflicted about, how to talk to them about that. In every single circumstance, I've been incredibly fortunate that they have always said the same thing to me, which is, we just want you to be happy.
Wow.
Right. And so I think that has been a really important part of making it something that I'm able to do, and that I'm able to do, and to allow myself to be happy, and to allow myself to be able to move forward. And so, it's relatively new, and it takes a while, I think, to be in the right place, to be able to do it. And I made very deliberate decisions along the way. I never, for 4 years, I didn't introduce anybody to the kids. And so it's been a very deliberate process for me, because at the end of the day, making sure that the kids were okay has been and will continue to be the most important part of all of that. To me, it's really important that the kids feel safe, that the kids feel like they're a part, that the kids know, the memory and the role that their mom will play in their lives forever. And so I've really attempted to be very deliberate in all of that.
It's powerful. It's powerful to have those kind of conversations, those meaningful conversations. It is a very, very nuanced and difficult journey to be in this new arena of being single again, and trying to navigate what that looks like, especially when you're young, when you're really young, and you expected to go through life with somebody by your side, not having to worry about that ever again. And then having to start that journey all over again. And in this day and age, it's different, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. And I'm thrilled to hear that for you, and to see that kind of support coming from Karen's family and the boys. And your voice sounds elevated when you talk about this new relationship. And so it's great to hear that kind of energy coming out of what was a difficult situation, and knowing that, things are falling into place a little bit, and you guys are learning a lot from this journey. The Fierce Foundation is doing some wonderful things. I know you guys just had a gala or an event recently.
We did.
In September.
We did.
How did that go?
It went great, right? We've been very fortunate to have a community that is very supportive of our mission and our objective in helping us kind of spread the word. And so, we had an event at a local restaurant called the Cornerstone Wayne, and it was a very successful event. And so,
Great.
Those are the types of things that are helping us to both fundraise, but also raise awareness. And as I said before, the really exciting point that we're at is that on January 1st, we're going to start kind of our grant disbursement process, where we'll really begin to start, giving back to folks. And so there'll be information on our website about that process. And so that's a really exciting development that is, coming within the next couple of months.
That's amazing. And so for all of our listeners, as we're wrapping up, what where can listeners go to learn more about the Fierce Foundation, to donate, to get involved, to help, to learn about upcoming events? Where can they visit? And if you're on social media, give us some of the social media as well, so that people can help support the work that you guys are doing.
Absolutely. First of all, I really appreciate, the opportunity for us to be able to partner with you and be able to raise awareness and, kind of get the word out. Our website is www.fierce-foundation.org. So, that's a website where people can go and learn a little bit more about Karen, learn a little bit more about our story, and, kind of keep up to date on what's happening as we enter kind of this next phase of the foundation. There is also a link for donations directly there on the website. On social media, we have an Instagram account, which is just The Fierce Foundation. So that is another great opportunity for people to be able to see and understand kind of what we're doing and to be able to partner with us.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information. Thank you for talking with us today and really helping us to see and understand what this journey can look like from a caregiver's perspective. We've had a lot of patients on, but there are two sides to every story. And being able to honor Karen's memory, doing the work that you're doing, helping and supporting the community, and hopefully at some point even larger than that, and really being an advocate for rare cancers such as glioblastoma, it means a lot. So, I'm proud to have you on. I'm proud to have shared your story and to be part of, the legacy that you and the boys are continuing in Karen's memory. I think she would be so proud of you guys. So I'm so grateful to you guys for the work that you're doing. And this has been a really great conversation. So to everybody out there that's listening, please go visit their website, support the work that they're doing, visit them on social media. And with that, we will be right back. This episode is brought to you by Mimivax LLC, developing immunotherapeutic vaccines and therapies for treatment of cancers such as glioblastoma. Learn more at mimivax.com. I want to thank Dave Stevenson for joining us today, talking about his journey through grief and loss. Grief and loss is such a vital topic. We need to be open. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be sharing our stories of our journeys, because it's not only how we help ourselves heal, but it's how we help others heal. And no matter the way we have come into grief and loss, every one of us is touched by a loss of some type in some way, shape, or form. By talking about our weaknesses and our strengths within the journey that we go through, we help to elevate others. We lift each other up. We help inspire, and we all feel connected, less alone. This world is vast. It is busy. There is noise and news and traumas and tribulations, worries, fears, economic woes, financial strain around every corner. We all have daily stressors, but there is a way for us to all feel connected. And if we lift each other up, then we provide ourselves with strength to get through. Thank you all for listening to this episode today. I dedicate this particular episode to my late husband, Michael Traphagen, who 2 years ago this week died from glioblastoma. As I continue to walk through my journey, I carry his love, his humbleness, and his strength with me as I continue to try to grow and to try to open myself up to curiosity, to hope for the future, to seeing where this road takes me. And wherever it takes me, I will be taking all of you along for the ride. Next month, join us as we talk to Dr. Randy D'Amico from Lenox Hill Hospital and Northwell Health. Until next month, thank you so much all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your fall the rest of this October, and have a wonderful, happy Halloween. You've been listening to the Game On Glio Podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. If you like our show, please share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast or on Facebook at Game On Glio. You can visit our website and our YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.